Welcome to Break the Rules with Dr. Lauren Lax, a podcast dedicated to quieting the noise in the health, food, and fitness world. Dr. Lauren is a leading nutritionist, therapist, and functional medicine practitioner on a mission to help others thrive in their own lives, mind, body, and soul. And now, your host, Dr. Lauren Lax.
Well, hello. Welcome to another edition of the Break the Rules podcast, where we talk about quieting the noise in the health, food, and fitness world. And today we're bringing the heat, talking about some burnout today with Caitlin Donovan, who is one of NYC's leading burnout experts, host of Fried, the Burnout Podcast, and author of the Bouncebackability Factor, set to release summer 2020. So, Kate, what should I call you? Kate in the house today. And I'm excited to dive into this topic because I think it's one that a lot of folks can relate to. Just saying I'm so stressed is a very common thing that is just like saying hi and bye in our society nowadays. And I'm just really interested to know what got you into doing this work you're doing in the world.
My master's degree is in Chinese medicine. So I worked as an acupuncturist internationally between California, Poland, and the Czech Republic for 12 years. And within that 12 years, for about 8 of it, I was stuck on a burnout cycle. And I just realized this recently. I mean, I've been doing this work for about 3 years now. And I kept saying on my own podcast, I've burnt out twice. I've burnt out 3 times. And then I started thinking, I didn't really know how many times I had burnt out and so I really started to dig into it a little more. And it kind of seems like I burnt out and then I sort of stayed there for 7 or 8 years, waved in and out of it on this cycle where I was, 5 or 10% better. So assumed that I could handle it and that I was okay again. And then I'd be at full burnout again. And then I'd do some research and I'd read a book and I'd get 10 to 15% better. But then I'd go back to normal life and I just stayed on this cycle for way too long. So now I feel like my mission is to get other people off this cycle, especially female entrepreneurs, because I think that changing the gender gap and placing power like in women's hands takes money. And if we're burning out while we're building businesses, then we don't get that power. So I want female entrepreneurs to be able to end this burnout cycle and build the businesses that they're meant to build and earn the money that they're meant to earn so that we can take some of that power back, so that we can start shifting the world in the direction that it's already naturally going. But we need some louder voices and some bigger names and some more impact. And you get that with big business and money.
Let's talk about defining burnout. So you were living in burnout 7 to 8 years. It's easy again for us to say, I'm so stressed. I'm feeling burned out. What does burnout actually mean at both a physiological and mental level?
If you look at the research, the main researcher for the past 30 years, her name is Dr. Christina Maslach, and she defines 3 portions that say, this is burnout. And all 3 of them have to exist. And the first one is physical and mental exhaustion, which covers, everything. Yeah. So that's kind of funny, but it is physical and emotional exhaustion. The second thing is cynicism and detachment. So the negative self-talk, sort of not feeling connected to friends and family, this kind of thing. And then the third thing is a lack of feeling impact and accomplishment. So when you have those 3 things at the same time, that's considered burnout, as far as the research shows currently. But when I read through, before I wrote my book, I read through almost every piece of research on burnout that I could find, full books, full research studies. My husband at the time was doing a postgraduate at Cambridge, so I had access to university libraries, which was really helpful. So I had, the full articles and the full research, and I really dug through it. And the issue that I see is that we are talking about burnout only in the context of being within a larger organization. We're talking about employee burnout. We're talking about doctors, corporate workers, nurses, things like that. But we're not talking about very often entrepreneurial burnout, mom burnout, like all these things that don't fit into traditional structures. So that's one problem. The other problem is because everyone's symptoms are so different in burnout, it's really hard to create a set of diagnostics that would work in the medical field. Right now, burnout is classified by the World Health Organization as an occupational hazard, not as a disease. And they're having a hard time figuring out what it means as a disease because it affects so many parts of your body. And the thing that I see happening is the symptoms that come up are things that you had some sort of tendency to earlier in your life. So say you were in a car accident when you were 7 and you had whiplash, your burnout will include neck pain and migraines. Right?
Trauma or just
right. Yeah. And it doesn't even have to be, exactly. Some sort of external stressor. Like it can be very simply, you traveled to Africa or Mexico and you had a really severe reaction to some sort of parasite. Your body is now cleansed of that parasite, but burnout still ends up in irritable bowel syndrome and diarrhea and constipation for you. So it really depends from person to person. The symptoms that I see in most people are neck and shoulder tightness. Almost every single person that fills out my health intake form clicks neck and shoulder tightness, foggy headedness, or some sort of head related foggy headedness or headache or heavy head or difficulty making decisions and thinking clearly, like that kind of some sort of brain something. And then the rest of it is like...
willy-nilly. It can be multiple. What is burnout versus adrenal fatigue, in quotes, how a lot of people in the health world throw around that terminology? Are they the same thing? What do you see?
I think that the word adrenal fatigue, the concept of adrenal fatigue should be updated a little bit. I don't know if you follow Aviva Ram at all. Yeah. So she has a podcast episode on the fact that your adrenals are not tired, basically. And that, yes, overwork will break things down. So I think that burnout and adrenal fatigue are very, very similar, if not the exact same thing. However, when I'm using the word burnout, I'm encompassing a lot more physical things, because the other thing that I learned through the research is there is some neuroscience around very long-term chronic stress and what's happening in the brain. So there's some shrinkage of your prefrontal cortex. There's overactivity of your limbic system. There's a lack of connection, proper communication between your left and right hemispheres. So there's all these things that are happening in long-term chronic stress that are not necessarily what we would consider typically adrenal fatigue.
Right. Yeah. In my training, we talked about really uprooting that terminology as well to HPA axis dysregulation.
Yeah. Yes. Which that's burnout.
Yeah.
Long-term, that's burnout. But it doesn't have to be burnout in the beginning. It's burnout after a significant chunk of time.
Yeah. Talk about the tipping point, like what separates like just daily stress and like stress physiological or mental. And then like, oh, I'm like over the edge now and like stuck in burnout.
So to me, one of the major differences is if you can take a vacation and come back refreshed, you were stressed.
Mm-hmm.
If you take a vacation and you don't come back refreshed, you're burnt out.
Gotcha.
Because a vacation is not going to heal your burnout. If you say, oh, I'm burnt out, but I went away for the weekend and I feel better, that's not burnout. Burnout is much more serious than that. Another thing that I think is very significant in burnout that I seem to be the only one talking about that I can find is that when you are actually burnt out and your body is just so tired, you cannot keep up with the same amount of exercise that you did in the past. So if you were someone who ran a 5K 3 times a week and it gave you energy, when you're burnt out, you'll run only 1.5 miles and you'll come home and need an 1.5 hour nap. If your exercise is causing you to crash, you're likely burnt out.
Gotcha. So it's just kind of like I'm in this hole now. How do you coach people about getting out of that place? And I've been there before, like you mentioned as well, and realizing, whoa, I've just been living in this for a while. That probably didn't happen overnight for that recognition for yourself. So talk a little bit about the steps for an individual of like, hey, am I in burnout? A, and then B, like, okay, now that I'm here, what do I do about it?
Yeah, I think the question of am I in burnout comes down to you sort of have to test it. Like, am I able to get back to a normal-ish state of health with relative ease? And I use that word on purpose because it's automatically longer term. It's not just a healing. It's a recovery. You're not going to take a pill and get better. It's a recovery. Because as you go through undoing all the different things that lead to burnout, you'll find other, deeper layers of the onion and deeper layers of the onion and deeper layers of the onion. So I think that if you're really not sure whether you're burnt out, you should do everything that you can to try and feel better. And if the typical things aren't working, then you're probably burnt out. Like, for instance, there's all this research that shows that gratitude journals are beneficial to people, correct? Like it's all over the place. You can't get away from it. However, when you're burnt out, those kind of exercises don't work for you. And it's because you don't have this communication between your left and right hemispheres. So you're not able to logically think about gratitude and actually physiologically feel gratitude at the same time. And those two portions are necessary if gratitude is to be a healing factor in your life. But when you're burnt out, you don't actually have the physical ability to do that. So if you're doing all the things that you're supposed to do, you're exercising and you're trying to do the right thing with your diet and you're writing a gratitude journal and you're meditating and you still feel like you're probably burnt out. That's the first part. And then you asked another question, a follow-up question.
Just like, okay, I'm in this little hole now. How do I get out of this hole?
Yeah. So the first thing obviously is to realize it, right? And then the next step for me is, depending on what's going on in that person's life, what is the easiest way that we can return some energy to them? Some energy that they're expending in a way that is not useful. So I have a Master Your Own Energy course that I send people to often when I don't actually think they need one-on-one coaching, because they can just do this course and kind of fill themselves up a little bit. And we go over all the places that you might be leaking energy, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, and try and plug those leaks so that you're not spending energy on things that are not vital to your survival at the moment. And energy leaks are things like worrying about your cousin's decision who lives 2,000 miles away, who you have no influence over. Kind of stuff. Like we need to figure out how to bring your energy back into your body and take it away from her life and her body, because you're not helping her and you're not helping yourself. We need to look at the way that your kitchen is set up and make sure that your knives are sharp enough and that you're not wasting time and energy slicing tomatoes with a dull knife. I really mean small, simple things like this. Like really, really the smallest, simplest things are massively important. If you are frustrated every single day when you cook eggs because they're sticking to your pan, go buy a new pan. Go buy a new pan. So we do these really tiny things first in order to gain some of your energy back so that we can use more of what you've got to start the healing process.
Energy drains or energy leaks, getting those out, our awareness to a baseline.
Yeah.
So once those are kind of being addressed and just continually addressed, what does a recovery or treatment kind of look like out of moving forward?
Yeah, it depends on what's going on in different people's lives. Like sometimes there's a physical portion that happens first. Mm-hmm. So because I have been in Chinese medicine for so long, I always have people do a health intake before coaching calls. And if I see on their coaching call that they're dehydrated and they likely have a vitamin D deficiency, and according to Chinese medicine, they should be eating warm foods, then before we get into coaching, the next step, they get some energy back, and then we get them vitamin D and enough water and warm foods. And then we get another little boost of energy, and then we can get into some of the coaching and do that kind of stuff. So a lot of times the first step is physical, and I often require or request. Right now it's a little bit difficult because doctors are not as available. It's Corona time and things are different. But I often require people to go see their MDs, have a full physical, do a full blood panel. If they have the ability to see a functional medicine doctor, that's my preference. Of course, because you guys have a totally different and more in-depth view of lab results and what people need, and et cetera, et cetera. So my preference, if people have the finances and the time available to them, is for them to see a functional medicine doctor, but at the very least, a basic blood panel and urine panel, so that we can find out what's going on physically in your body. Because if you're already burnt out, so say every day you have 100 units of energy to spend, just, hypothetically, you get 100 units when you wake up in the morning. If you're already burnt out and there's all these miniature things happening in your body, like leaky gut, that's something that you talk about on the podcast. And that's something that is very important in burnout. When you have things like that going on, if you're not taking care of them, it's like you're spending 40 units of that energy that you got in the morning before you even start your day. And you're expecting to be able to spend 100. So you do, but then you're 40 in the hole because you weren't paying attention to the fact that it costs you 40 to deal with your leaky gut and your, whatever else is going on, even if it's a pain thing. So if somebody has shoulder pain, my request is that they go see somebody and deal with that shoulder pain, because that's costing them energy every day to heal.
I see. So helping those individuals just kind of like pick and choose where, saving that energy, and then the proactive step.
And then restoring the physical body, right? That's massively important, because I think there's a lot of coaching that's like mindset. Like, your mindset might be amazing, but if you can't absorb your nutrients, like...
Is there any dietary themes you see for individuals in burnout and climbing out of burnout, whether like diets that they are eating and then effective therapeutic foods?
Yeah. For Chinese medicine, the basics for the diagnostics that kind of go in Chinese medicine, that kind of go in accordance with Chinese medicine, is basically like soups and stews and warming foods and lots of herbs and spices and things like this become really the most important. Just really basic stuff. Like, I'm talking bone broth and barley, really, really simple food.
Yeah. Just to ease digestion.
Yes.
For a good, how long can a person turn around their burnout to, if especially like 7-8 years, if they've been living in that state?
It takes people, from what I've seen over the past few years, it takes people anywhere from 3 months to 3 years to recover. 3 years of recovery seems to be most of the time when people are doing it on their own.
Do you find that there's a set point that can happen with a long burnout? And the reason why I ask is there's some research that I read with my own history of anorexia, and that when that starts very young for an individual, and it could be other trauma as well, that a set point can happen with the cortisol that study did not see a recovery even in recovery. Like, a person can feel better, but my cortisol tends to be higher freely in my tissues, but I have a very low cortisol output at a physiological level. So just wondering, in your research, what you found with really, is there a set point for cortisol that there's kind of, you can be made better, but it's not still optimal?
I don't know too many people that have optimal cortisol anyway. That's not even thing. I don't even know that that's something that American culture can strive for. We're not designed, the culture that we live in is not designed in a way that allows us as a general rule to have normal cortisol levels. I don't believe. But I do think that they can heal and continue to get better over time. And I have seen that in my own results and in patients. I think that you can get a set point, but I think you can break through it. But I think breaking through set points like that, just like you said, requires some sort of trauma undoing.
Man, it makes me kind of want to go live in the blue zones and just compare individuals in the blue zones to our go society. I
think one of the big issues as far as American culture is concerned, one of our top 10 American cultural values is individualism. And so we really have this belief that we can get through and do everything on our own. And that's not how anything happens. You can't even eat on your own. Like just the plate that the food is going on was made by someone, so maybe it was made by you, but then you had to get the clay somewhere and you had to get the whatever, blah, blah, blah. The food on your plate, there's farmers and trucks and truck drivers and stores and there's nothing that we do truly alone. But I think Americans as a general rule are missing very often this community connection, because we're so convinced that you're supposed to be able to pull up your bootstraps and do it by yourself.
Right. So how do we even we recognize that, how do we change that, or how do you encourage folks to really switch that paradigm?
So for me, that's about finding a very small group of people, 4 or 5, really mini, that you turn to all the time, that are doing something similar to you in some way, whether it's you go to the same church, or whether it's you all play badminton at the same gym, or whether it's you all walk your dogs at the same time. I don't even think you have to be very close to these people. I think you have to have people that are outside your family that